Now I'm really excited to welcome back one of the very best in the college football handicapping business. You know him from radio shows all across the nation, podcasts, whatever. Really happy to bring back Mr. Brad Powers from BradPowersports.com. You can follow him at Brad Powers 7. Brad, thanks so much for taking the time to come back on this show on Championship Week, man. How did the holiday weekend treat you?
Ups and downs, like pretty much any week. But I can tell you from a fan aspect, it was certainly enjoyable. I thought football delivered over the holidays, but you know, some wins and losses, some things I got right, some things I got wrong. I mean, the bankroll was okay, so that's all I can ask for.
Well, there you go, man. I filled up on turkey and stuffing and everything that goes with it, and had a couple beers. Enjoyed myself. I stayed home the whole weekend. So successful. I didn't have to
There you
go
go.
anywhere. So that's a great weekend when I don't feel like I don't have to go anywhere. Don't have to take the kids anywhere. The wife went on vacation, so I was watching them. So it was football, football, football for me. But it all started out with Michigan beating Ohio State, man. And holy cow, was that a fun game to watch, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I was a little bit stunned. I mean, especially considering what those two teams have done against one another the last 15 years. I mean, but it was evident early that Michigan came ready for a fight. And Ohio State, not so much. But I mean, just the scene there in the big house, where if you're talking, the snow. It reminded me of growing up because I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, which is basically ground zero of that rivalry, right on the Michigan Ohio border. It kind of reminded me of what the game used to look like with me growing up. So I was happy for Michigan fans. I wasn't happy for my bankroll because I had Ohio State Big Ten futures. I had Ohio State over their season win total. CJ Stroud 40-1 to win the Heisman. I mean, it was probably my biggest loss of the entire season. But I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I had Matt Corral at 27-1 before the season, and then I
That's
hedged
good.
back. I hedged back at CJ Stroud about 5-6 weeks ago at 5.5-1. I figured, well, they just lost to Bama, and then now all of a sudden Bryce Young's is the front runner, and almost to keep our tickets back alive, they would have to be completely destroyed by Georgia this week, I would think, to if I have
Yeah,
a
I
shot
agree.
if I have a shot at one of those two. So interesting stuff. Yeah, I took a hit there, but the over hit and that I barely got that done because I'll tell you, that snow a little bit worried me. And I think the snow played into that game a little bit too. I think it definitely gave Michigan the advantage there. Ohio State's the finesse team.
Oh yeah, I think Ohio State's passing attack was effective, especially their wide receivers were a little tentative. Yeah, I mean, in perfect conditions, does Michigan still win? I think so. I mean, Ohio State's defense could not stop Michigan whatsoever, but in perfect conditions, Ohio State's probably got a better of a puncher's chance. But look, you're in Ohio. I mean, it's not like a Florida team was coming up there to play. I mean,
Right.
kudos for Michigan for handling the conditions much better than the Buckeyes.
That's a great point. I mean, kudos to them. It was a rushing attack for Michigan that really just completely blew out Ohio State, and they ran the ball better than Wisconsin and any other school that I seen just that game. And yeah, I mean, you got to face it. The momentum, the kids had that extra percentage to try that game, and I mean, Harbaugh's face was just amazing to see. But I still have Ohio State power rated higher, not by a lot no more, but I do.
I do
Uh,
too.
okay.
Yep, I still have the Buckeyes third. I have Michigan fourth on a neutral. I'd have the Buckeyes right around a 4-point favorite still.
Okay, well, cool. That's actually one of my questions that I want to ask. Who's your top six power rated teams? And I'll just say I have Georgia and I have Ohio State second.
Okay.
And then I have Bama third, and then I have Michigan fourth. It's a much closer fourth than it used to be, obviously. And then Cincinnati, a little bit break between them. Cincinnati. Now, here's the fun part. I have Notre Dame ahead of Oklahoma State by a nudge. I
Okay.
don't. I have some issues with Oklahoma State, but we'll get into that in a few. Who is your top six or seven, actually?
So
Since I said
obviously Georgia's one. I mean, and they're right around what the spread is ahead of my number two team, Alabama, this week. So I got them about 6.3, I think it is to be exact, above Alabama, who's number two. Number three is Ohio State, who's just slightly behind the Crimson Tide at this point. We're talking a point or so. Then Michigan's four. Five for me is actually Oklahoma State, but and keep in mind, I bet Baylor on the opener, and I know we'll get into that game, but I don't think I'm that high on Oklahoma State. I know a lot of people might be surprised they're fifth. Sixth for me would be Cincinnati. And then, after that, I mean, I think Notre Dame's up to 7 now, but I mean, now I got to figure out who's going to be on that coaching staff for the bowl game. So a lot of power ratings outside of the teams playing this weekend. I pushed them aside. I was like, I'll spend all week, going over full season averages and the next 2 weeks actually seeing who's going to play. But a lot of those are just, I would say, soft power ratings at this point.
Yeah, especially when all the changes happen. And it's fun. It's funny. I used to love hearing you talk about Notre Dame, your love-hate relationship with this team.
It's still there.
It's still there. They started out with the bad offensive line, and that's improved some, I have to say. I mean, that Florida State game and that Toledo game is light years away now, it feels like, and they've just been dominating people. Not the hardest schedule, but the funny thing about Oklahoma State, the committee is going to favor them in a win. But if I look at their strength of schedule, they're three teams, the three non-conference teams were terrible. I mean, for Oklahoma State, very easy games, and they didn't exactly blow these teams away either. I mean, they had Southwest Missouri State FCS. They win by 7 points. Tulsa, they win by 5 points. They go to Boise. They could have lost that game many times in Boise. They win by 1 point there. And then the rest is kind of history. And they did get Baylor at home, and we'll talk about that game. But then their losses against Iowa State. If you at least look at Notre Dame, they have a better loss just because we're Cincinnati's ranked, I would say. And I guess it's, a home game, though. They shouldn't have lost a home game against Cincinnati there. But at the same time, I got to give Notre Dame a little credit for beating Wisconsin. And North Carolina was supposed to be a pretty good team. They almost got NC State last game. So it's not like they played that less of a schedule. But if you look, you say, okay, Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma. Well, let's go back to what Oklahoma's been doing. They barely beat Tulane. And that tricked me a little bit, Brad, throughout the season. Because, we're thinking now Tulane, we're kind of high on Tulane coming in. And we're like, okay, Tulane, they are what we thought they were. And then Tulane stinks the whole season. They barely beat Nebraska. Nebraska should have won that game. 3-point game at West Virginia, just a bunch of close games. And then obviously they get beat double digits at Baylor. And then you see what they really are. And they beat Iowa State, but that hasn't aged so well. So at the same time, I can't say Oklahoma State's had the hardest schedule, Brad.
No, I agree. And I mean, go back to those non-conference games. They could have, you can pick any one of those they could have lost. I mean, every single one of those, I'm not saying, wasn't a fluky final. In fact, I think a couple of them, I thought Oklahoma State probably should have lost, including the Boise State game. But then, I mean, I'm going to give them credit because comparative to expectations, I mean, since those first 3 games, they've covered 9 out of 10. And then the only non-cover was depending on what line you got last week. I just graded that one as a push right at 4. So, they've certainly improved like a Notre Dame, but you're right. I would say Notre Dame, in my opinion, has got a little bit more upside, especially on the offense side of the ball. Spencer Sanders, to me, is still a walking turnover. So if he turns it over a couple of times, I mean, I've been on him in the past couple of years where I've lost bets because of him, because of his turnover. He's prone. So I'm right there with. They're close. They're nudging between me as far as the power rating goes. Notre Dame's schedule leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, I made a case that probably the Purdue win was one of their more impressive wins. I mean, when you look at what Purdue became by the end of the season, but not a lot of marquee games on either one of these team schedules. And you're right, Oklahoma to me was one of the biggest disappointments in college football this year.
Yeah, 100%. And what's funny, you only wish there's a play-in game to get in the playoffs. Well, that would be obviously 5 playoff teams, and then we can keep going on and on about going down that rabbit hole. No, you convinced me. If they covered 9 games, they're in. Forget it. We're thinking like sports bettors here. Give it to Oklahoma State for the way they've been covering.
Well, Notre Dame's covered 7 in a row to end the season.
And 9's bigger though. It was a 9, you said?
Yep, yeah, it is. Yep, 9-0-1 last 10.
Yep. Sorry, Notre Dame. Oklahoma State is in. Let's
I love it.
Let's move it to the next question then. All these coaching moves, I mean, not a ton, but they hit me by surprise a little bit. I wasn't quite ready for some of this stuff, Brad. I mean, you got Lincoln Riley dissing Oklahoma almost. I mean, if you just quit on a team, it feels like you're dissing, but I agree with the move. He went to USC, and
Yep.
I'll tell you why I agree. And it's when I started the podcast with it's once you get up there, your expectations to the media and your fans are higher. You're starting at a very high place. It's hard to sustain that. You go to these other massive, powerful schools that are in the dumps, just getting the next season to a bowl game can be looked at as good, and then possibly getting them to the playoffs afterwards, right? Doesn't that seem to
Yep.
make sense for what the reason Brian Kelly did, even at Notre Dame? People saying you're dissing Notre Dame, they're the place that you want to coach. No, not necessarily. I mean, he wore out his welcome, best record ever, but still, it's hard to get in these playoffs. It's extremely hard. And at least with LSU, you're going to get a little nudge in recruiting there. You're going to get the Southern kids, and that's always been
Yep.
talked about. So a lot of people say, yeah, he's getting paid more money. He's getting paid probably 3-4 more a year, maybe less than what Notre Dame would counter him with. But at the same time, he gets to start on a fresh slate, Brad. And I think that's important.
Well, two fronts. I'll start with Lincoln Riley. I think it's a home run hire for SC. I think he fits there. I mean, you look at his recruiting classes, he was trending more towards California. His style of offense says California. I think it's outstanding for college football if you're not an Oklahoma fan. College football desperately needs a power out in the West for the popularity and the growth of the sport. So I think that's, if I had to rank like best hires in the last decade, probably Urban Meyer to Ohio State. I still think Harbaugh to Michigan was an outstanding hire when you looked at his qualifications when he got hired. And then I would probably put Lincoln Riley right there at third. So I just think it's a home run. Now, I will say the one caveat, and I tweeted this, is what would worry me a little bit. Lincoln Riley's best team at Oklahoma was his first team. That was the one with Baker Mayfield, almost beat Georgia in the Rose Bowl game. Probably should have won that game to go to the championship. And I would say his worst team was this year's team. I mean, easily so. This was his worst team. So that would concern me. Brian Kelly, I mean, my love-hate with Notre Dame, probably a lot of it's with Brian Kelly. I think he's done an outstanding job the last 5 years. It bothers me that it took him 7-8 years to get to that point. He made so many mistakes in the first, 6-7 years at Notre Dame that he probably should have been fired after the 16 season. He's not a relentless recruiter. I'm not sure that's going to be a great fit at LSU. He's going to have to surround himself with elite recruiters. I was stunned by it, but I'm not so stunned because I kind of know Brian Kelly, and I don't think he's a great person. So I'm okay. So, I mean, as a Notre Dame fan, I'm okay with it. So that should tell you everything. Everyone talks about him being the winningest coach in Notre Dame history. He's also the losingest coach in Notre Dame history. I mean, he won the most games because he coached in the most games in Notre Dame history.
Yeah, I thought they meant by winning percentage compared to wins.
No,
No.
the number one. So, not to go down a rabbit hole, the number one and number two all-time winning percentage leaders in college football history are actually Notre Dame coaches. One is Knute Rockne. Two is Frank Leahy. I think third's Urban Meyer.
Well, look at that. We learned something today. Thank you, Brad. That is a great
Yeah.
stat right there. That's great information. Now, okay, yeah, throw that record out if you coached the longest. That makes no sense. And I was scratching my head a little bit every time I heard that. I just never got around to looking it up. Yeah, I don't give them anything for just a bunch of wins. Now, not getting past that first round of the playoffs has not been that great, or not winning the national championship, right? That's the important thing, and that's what everybody seems to want nowadays. Obviously, when the playoffs expand, things will change. But yeah, man, I think that I was a little surprised that Florida hired the Louisiana coach.
Billy Napier.
Yeah, Billy Napier, and I almost thought they were trying to look for another guy with a little bit bigger a name, maybe Cincinnati's coach, or I don't know, anybody that was kind of out there. I know that the former Washington coach is out there as well. I'm going blank on names. Chris Peterson. There's some interesting names out there. Then they bring him, and that's the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt was looked at for years as not as good as any of them, even in Conference USA status. But now I would argue that the Sun Belt is probably the second best behind the American Athletic Conference. Maybe Mountain West may be better. I don't know, but Conference USA is not good, and the MAC's not good at all. So it was an interesting hire. It's in the same southern area, but does he recruit expectations? I mean, does he have those connections? Is the question, Brad.
So that's an excellent question. I really like the hire. I mean, number one, he served on both the staff of Dabo Sweeney and Nick Saban. I love that he's been on those two different staffs. They're two entirely different uh, ways to go about a program. More of a family atmosphere. Dabo, obviously successful, and obviously Nick Saban's a different model. That most successful coach in the history of college football. So I like his experience in that regard. Recruiting, he's recruited well above expectation in Louisiana. I would say he's one of the best group of five recruiters in the country. So he'll be relentless on the recruiting trail, which is something Dan Mullen wasn't. So I think, and usually when you see these coaching changes, you fire an offensive guy, you go defense. And, you fire a guy that's maybe more X's and O's, you go more recruiting. They fired an X's and O guy, in my opinion. Dan Mullen's really good at the court, developing and coaching quarterbacks, and went with a guy that's going to, hit the recruiting trail a lot harder than at least Dan Mullen. So actually, I like the hire. Is it a big name like Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly? No, but I think he's going to be fine there at Florida.
Do you think they made a run at Lincoln, or did they even know to?
No, I don't think so. I think the Riley thing was either LSU, maybe. I mean, if you believe some of that. And once, that didn't go down, then he went to SC. So I don't think Florida reached out to him.
Okay, that's interesting too. Yeah. And I know that Fickle's the one I was talking about in Cincinnati. I want to keep calling him the quarterback Ritter for some reason. I get those two names confused, Desmond Ritter and Luke Fickle, for some reason. But they both have been working hand in hand for the last, 4 or 5 years now, Brad. And so that's going to be interesting. Are you going to have a rooting interest for the underdog coming into this playoff scenario, or you just kind of just
yeah, number one, I'm gonna root for my bets.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of ruined me as a college football fan, that it's always about my pocketbook first. No, I'll root for Cincinnati, no question. And I'm not an underdog guy, I'm just not. But I mean, I like Luke Fickle. I like the program he's built there. So yeah, I'll be rooting for Cincinnati.
All right, now good stuff. I think I'm not going to know, and of course it is bets first. But if I don't have a side in this game, which maybe I shouldn't, I'm sure there's going to be some sharp lines out there. Maybe we'll see if I can get behind the underdog here. So next question I have is, what happens if Notre Dame does make it? I mean, well, here's the thing. I think Oklahoma State's vulnerable. I bet Baylor too. I'm going to get into that game with you. I think they're vulnerable. I think Cincinnati can be jumped off guard by a very good Houston team. I'm going to watch this Houston Clayton team over there. They've been fantastic this year. That could happen. I mean, it just really takes those two things. And Alabama losing to Georgia, which is favored. I mean, this is not out of the realm that Notre Dame is going to be in the playoffs without a coach, right?
Yeah, I think it takes two things, Oklahoma State losing and, Alabama losing. I mean, I'm not sure that they put a 2-loss Alabama team over Notre Dame. Maybe they do, but Alabama hasn't been impressive. It's not like they lost 2 close games and killed everybody else on their schedule. I mean, they have 4 or 5 close wins this year. I mean, and we're not talking that they, over great teams. I mean, when you look at close wins over Florida, 6-6, LSU 6-6, lose to an 8-4 A&M team. I mean, I'm Arkansas 8-4 was a struggle for Alabama. So Alabama loses, they're out. That puts Notre Dame up 1 spot. Oklahoma State, who I think will be ahead of Notre Dame when the college football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday night. They lose to Baylor, which I already bet Baylor. I kind of like Baylor in the game. Notre Dame's right there. So, I mean, that's the stunning. I can't believe Kelly would leave a playoff team, but I hope nobody else now criticizes any player for, opting out of a bowl game or a playoff game at this point, when Brian Kelly basically gave the deuces to Notre Dame when they could easily make the playoff. It's not even that far-fetched.
I don't even know how he could live with himself if his team won and he left the team.
I would love it. Nothing more. Remind me of, man, I'm dating myself.
Please happen. Happen.
Steve Fisher for Michigan was an interim coach for Michigan's basketball team in 1989. And the head guy left for Arizona State. He's the interim, and Michigan wins the national championship in basketball.
I think the 89 is I was pretty young during those times, but it somewhat rings a bell. It's not perfectly in my memory right there, but I'll tell you this, those are the kind of stories that just blow your mind, because then LSU's fans and everybody's going to question, what did we just hire here? And all that just piles on, even though we know any game, anytime you can win. This is just football. Things
Yep.
happen. All right, great stuff. Let's move into some of these big games then. We'll start out with Western Kentucky versus UTSA. And I believe this game is going to be played on Friday, December 3rd. UTSA now is a 2-point dog, and the total of this went slightly down to 72. If I'm not mistaken, this game is in San Antonio, isn't it, Brad?
It is. So home game for UTSA, and that is a factor. They've been having some good crowds at the end of the season in the Alamo Dome. And if you watch the game against Southern Miss and UAB, that crowd had an impact. Had several false start penalties for those Conference USA teams, not used to playing in front of anybody, and they're played in front of 30 plus thousand inside a dome. So the noise has been a factor. With that being said, even with the noise behind them, UTSA, didn't perform very well in their last 3 games, 2 at home at Southern Miss, UAB, and then last week getting their doors blown off against North Texas, where the market was heavy on North Texas all week. I was a part of that. I just think in current form, I know UTSA already beat Western Kentucky on the road, so you're thinking, oh my God, they beat them on the road. Now they're at home, and now they're getting points. I agree with the move here. I bet Western Kentucky on the open. And I think as long as you're not laying 3, I think Western Kentucky's the play. They're in better form at the end of the season. Keep in mind, Western Kentucky was a team, one of the least experienced teams in the country coming in. And it was a year where everybody is experienced because of COVID. Everybody came back. And they had an entirely different offense. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback, new wide receivers, transfers. They brought in the Houston Baptist offense. So that was an early season game when they lost to UTSA. Since then, I have upgraded Western Kentucky more than any team in the country in my power ratings. They beat UTSA on the road.
UAB blew that game.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, 4th and 1. You're leaving 2 minutes left or whatever, 150. I don't remember, something like that on the clock. You get it, you win, or you're just going to give them the ball when you're up by 4. That just spells disaster all over it in college football, where the clock stops on 1st down, man, doesn't it?
Yep.
I was just like, don't punt it. And they did. I had a sprinkle on UAB last week and a little bit on the money line there. But of course, I was bigger on the spread. But man, I'll tell you this, I did lose last week. I was low on North Texas, and I waited till it hit the 10. You're the guy that moved the line down, and then I hit it at 10. I was like, you kidding me? And then, yeah, they just laid another egg. Looked pretty bad. And there's a couple games that UTSA should have lost. They should have lost at Memphis too. And they had like a crazy comeback that early
Yeah, they
game.
did.
And look at these schedules. They're terrible schedules right there. I mean, these are very bad, but I will argue that Western Kentucky has had the harder schedule. UTSA struggles at Illinois. Western Kentucky had to play Army, and they had to play Michigan State. And they play Michigan State pretty strong. And I definitely have Army as a better team in my power ratings. In the Indiana one didn't age well, but you got to look at, like you said, what they've done recently. My problem is this is a home game, and UTSA, they had 192 rushing yards. Can Western Kentucky now stop the run? That's where I get is UTSA going to try to play? They play fast, which is bad. You shouldn't play fast against a team that thrives playing fast like Western Kentucky. And so that's the way I look at it. A lot of people looking at the over, but it's a high number for a championship game. And so that's
I
what
agree.
So I'm shy about that one. I have no play, man. What you probably got a decent number on Western Kentucky.
Yeah, I bet Western Kentucky plus 2.5.
That's a great number, man. Well, look at that. It's all moving in your direction. That's perfect. Let's move on to the next game then. And we have the other Friday game, a big game, Oregon versus Utah. And this is going to be played in Las Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. The total on this game is 59. The spread is Utah -3. Now, this is so funny because Utah, Brad, to me, I can't figure out if they're just a massive 7 to 10 point home field advantage, and they are completely different when they're on the road, almost Jekyll and Hyde. Now, the numbers didn't really show that, but I will look at I did look at their road games, and besides the Oregon State game, the road games have been cake. And I think this is a smelly line to have Utah just -3 here after they blew out Oregon before. So I'm gonna let you get started. What is your thoughts on this?
I bet Oregon plus 3.5. Also took +3. So I do like the Ducks here. Keep in mind they played just 2 weeks ago. Utah was at home with that really good home field advantage, in my opinion. Not only playing in altitude, But I think it's one of the better home field advantages in college football, at least west of the Mississippi, out here west, where teams and fans don't care too much about football, in my opinion, at least compared to the South and where I grew up in Ohio, Michigan. But they were laying 3 in that game at home. Now you're in a neutral site, a true neutral site. I don't expect either team to have the crowd edge here. Neither one's played in Allegiant Stadium, so I mean, they might be both in a little bit of awe of that stadium at the beginning. So I thought Utah's a little pricey here, especially you mentioned their road. Look at their home away dichotomy for actually both teams. It's striking. Both have been considerably better at home than on the road. Utah, especially losing road games to BYU and San Diego State early in the season, Oregon State in conference play. So this is one where I think both are max motivated. Winner goes to the Rose Bowl. Utah's never been to the Rose Bowl. So, I mean, even though Oregon's playing with revenge, I just played my numbers. My numbers said Utah 1.5. So I took the 3.5, 3 on Oregon.
Yeah, definitely don't disagree with that. I think Oregon's got the second life here. Oregon was playing with pressure before, weren't they?
Yeah.
They had that national championship stuff, and they still had that smelly loss at Cal. And then now the pressure is kind of released. And I'll just tell you right now, my power rating on this is almost equal. I think I actually have Oregon a little bit better. I mean, this is a neutral site. I have Oregon a point better than Utah. So I'm right around there.
Key number. You got to be betting the Ducks.
I don't know why I haven't. Maybe it's because I wanted to hear what you had to say a little bit, because, like I said, this line smelled to me a little bit. Seeing Utah still only a 3-point favorite after a blowout, I scratched my head. And I know that obviously the bookies and the market knows better than the public. Thinking that just because they blew them out once, it's better. I think that I'm going to get 3.5 or 4, possibly too. I think there's a chance that Utah money comes in. People are going to have this narrative, Brad. They're going to say Oregon had their national championships hopes blown away. They might not show up. Well, I know Oregon because I'm a Badger fan, and they've cleaned our clock enough times in the postseason at the Rose Bowl. So I'll be on Oregon probably, but it's at 3 right now, and I think I might get a 3.5 again, Brad.
You might. I'll say this. I always like looking at what the fans are going to be coming in, because I've seen it already, but before in the past, when you get a big crowd support, BYU earlier this year, I saw some late money come in on BYU against Arizona in that neutral site game. Iowa State took money against UNLV when you had an influx of 30 or 40,000, visiting fans, and they're playing. They're not probably used to betting in sports. That they do that. I mean, that's something that I'm not sure is going to have a factor in this game, but keep that in your back pocket for a little bit of tip when you get these opposing fan bases coming into Vegas. I sometimes, at least if you're betting in Vegas, I sometimes see those teams with big crowd supports get a little expensive at the local books.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So keep that in mind. Obviously, a lot of the nation is based on DraftKings and some other books as well, even some offshore books. But that's interesting. So I always like to compare the Vegas line with the East Coast too. I like to see what's going on.
You have to.
See what's going on between those two. I do remember why I don't have a play. I bet the under in this. I bet under 60. So
there you go. I don't disagree with that either.
Yeah, here's the reason. And you think, okay, neither defense is that great. The offense, well, when two teams are playing each other in such a big game, the nerves seem to hit, and then the scheming is kind of gone in a way. It's like, well, we snuck these plays upon them. Now what? These are the scheming plays that we could beat this defense by, but now this defense is going to be looking for stuff like that. That's just kind of like a general bet the under. And this being at 60 and a place that neither of these teams played before at Allegiant Stadium. Yeah, man, it's like a black house in that place, man. It's dark. I like the under, man. I like the under 60. I think that's going to hit. I mean, went under last game, of course, it was because of Oregon's lack of scoring, but Utah's defense has really stepped it up lately. And I think with guys like Kayvon Thibodeau and the rest of all those big 4 or 5 star recruits on that Oregon defense, I think they finally step it up, Brad. So I'm going to stick with that. Let's move on to the next one. Right into Saturday, and we already gave our play on this. Baylor, Oklahoma State. I actually gave this play on the earlier week podcast. I'll tell you what, man. I think that their quarterback's going to play. he sat out last game because they were playing Texas Tech, and they kind
Yep.
of expected it was going to be a win. Now it was a hell of a lot closer than they probably even presumed it to be. And I'll tell you, Texas Tech played their ass off that game. But Bohannon's got a hammy, and he's got that extra week. And we know hammies can be kind of bad, but there's no way in hell a hammy's going to stop him from playing this game. When I look at this game, I see offense versus defense. Now we saw this matchup once. Oregon State won by 10 points, and Oklahoma State, sorry, did actually run better. But at this point, I love Dave Aranda, and I love how he makes adjustments on his defense. As a Badger fan, I missed him when he left, and he did a great job at LSU to win that championship, and he deserved this job. And holy cow, has Baylor blown away people's expectations. I bet them over the 5.5 season wins, and I didn't think I was going to get it that easy. I was really happy about that.
But I'll sweat that one.
No, dude,
that was wrapped up in October.
That thing was wrapped up on Game 6. Heck yeah, that was smooth like silk. But we all have our bad ones as well. But I'll tell you that it's offense versus defense here, and this is just another time where the same teams play each other. You lean the dog a little bit. You got 5 points, and I sure as hell, Brad, don't have Oklahoma State 5 points better on my power ratings on a neutral field, especially. I mean, I think this spread should be, with him in for sure, it should be 1 or 2. That's what I think. What are your thoughts?
If he's in, I'm probably closer in the 3.5, 4 range. Right now, I'm at 5.5 with him being questionable. So I did bet Baylor on the open. Somebody, it was their 6.5s were widely available, at least on Sunday. To me, it's also a play against Oklahoma State. I mean, you just finally won Bedlam, something you don't do very often in the history of that series. Even under Mike Gundy, you don't beat Oklahoma. That was a very emotional game. But more importantly to me is Oklahoma State is playing with playoff pressure, something that they are not accustomed to. This is basically a win and they're probably in situation for Oklahoma State, depending on what happens to Alabama, Georgia. But I'm not sure that they'll handle it, especially coming off a really emotional win against their arch rival Oklahoma. So that was kind of a fade there. And you mentioned it in another key. I think the world of Dave Aranda, and I think he's one of the elite X's and O's guys in the entire country. And people are going to, look what he did to Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And that was the lowest output Lincoln Riley's ever had at Oklahoma. So I think he'll come up with a game plan here to limit Spencer Sanders. And Spencer Sanders for Oklahoma State's high variance. So if he's not locked in, it can be 3 turnovers in a matter of a quarter and a half with that guy.
Absolutely. And Jerry Bohannon's not afraid to run the ball, and I think he'll be okay to run. He's got 303 yards of the season, but people look at the sack rate, ranking 6th or 7th, I believe, in the nation. I'll just double check my numbers here. Oklahoma State's up there. Second. They're second in the nation sack rate. That just pushes the quarterback out to make some nice speed moves. There's 2 ways to approach it. It's almost like sacking Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. The teams with the great sack rates lose those games because they take off for massive chunks of yards. Well, that's what Baylor does. And Dave Aranda's defense is sneaky good, man. No, I'm glad you're on the same side as me. Now, I didn't get your number. And I saw the 6 too, because I did shop on Sunday, as I always do. But I missed it. And I'm like, I had to come back to it. It was kind of like I was still doing my power ratings. And I'm, a little late on that. And then I come back to it. I'm like, this is a play. I got to play this. And then it's at 5. I'm like, geez, well, I got to take the 5. So I think, I think they have a chance of winning this game. That brings another question to me. Oklahoma State and Michigan are in this situation. Now, I don't do my letdown spot article, my motivational spots article because of championship week. But if there is any letdown spots, it's Michigan and this team, isn't it?
No question, Michigan and Oklahoma State. And even though my numbers weren't anti those 2 teams big time this week, I put plays on their opponents because of it, especially Michigan. I just think, that was 10 years of frustration being let out into one game. And I was the type of team, if you're not locked in, they turn you over. And I know we'll get to that game, but yeah, conference championship week shouldn't be a letdown, especially for these 2 playing with obviously win and they're maybe into the playoffs, especially Michigan's in. But they're not used to, neither one of them's used to that kind of pressure. And neither one's handled it that well. Gundy's really never gotten over the hump at Oklahoma State. and obviously Harbaugh hasn't. So it would almost be on brand for both of the teams. Forget the point spread to lose the games outright.
Man, that's so possible if you put it like that. I just said this is a championship game, so it should be ignored. But man, you'll be kicking yourself if you're thinking this and you don't play on that side. And like you said, the money line could be the best play in this situation. Forget the spread. So interesting stuff there. We'll get to that game too, but we covered Baylor pretty well. Next game is Ford Field, Northern Illinois. I'm not going in order, apparently. I'm going off order, but Northern Illinois is playing Kent State. And Northern Illinois is a 3-point dog. Kent State's actually got a little juice behind the 3 at some of these books. Massive total, 74.5. And I'll quick start here because I don't have a side in this game yet. But what I will say is that Northern Illinois is the most overrated team in this position, hands down. They rank 130th in rush EPA. I mean, how do you even get to this spot in any conference in football if you rank 130th in rush EPA? It blows my mind. And I'll just look at yards per rush here. Northern Illinois gives up 5.7 yards per rush, and Kent State is one of the better rushing teams, 5.3. That's all they need to do.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, I took Kent State 14-1 before the season to win the MAC. I was pretty high on them. I love their coach, and he was a former Badger, played little quarterback, some tight end at the Badgers, and Northern Illinois. I'm shocked that they're playing them, but I thank goodness that they are because this is a much easier matchup than I expected. Thoughts?
So first off, I'm gonna give you kudos because I played Kent State 2 to win the MAC, and I think it was 12-1. So you got a better number than me. So I give you credit. I try not to let that happen again. No, I'm kidding.
No.
So that's a really good number. I'm not going to hedge. I bet Kent State on the open. I laid 2.5. I think it was. I think it's a bad matchup for Northern Illinois. The one thing I'll say positive for Northern Illinois is that they, basically didn't play at all last week. They sat their quarterback. They had everything wrapped up. So that 3-touchdown defeat to Western Michigan, that's a bad data point. Don't look into that one too much. But look into their other games. This is a team that's very fortunate to be here. They won a bunch of close games. I mean, from a power ratings aspect, I have Western Michigan ahead of them, Toledo ahead of them, Central Michigan ahead of them. So this is a team that's the 4th best team, in my opinion, in their own division. And they're playing for a conference championship. So Kent State to me are nothing. I'm not going to play the under because I've been playing Kent State unders and they've been blowing over their totals since the early start of the season. So to me, it's a small play on Kent State.
No, I agree. I think that it's funny to see them negative 6.1 yards per play, negative 0.61 yards per play, and Northern Illinois in this position. They keep just getting fortunate things to happen. Their turnover margin must be massively in their favor. I didn't look at that yet, but I think that huge amount of luck for them. I wouldn't be shocked if Kent State weights the floor with them personally. So I'll be making a play on them. I just have that future just like you have in the back of my pocket. Let's move on to the next game here, and I'll try to get a little more in order here. Utah State versus San Diego State. Now, San Diego State's laying about 5.5. The total of this is about 50. And this, if I'm not mistaken, is being played in the Los Angeles area, isn't it?
Carson, California. That's where San Diego State's been playing their home games the last couple of years. They move into a brand new stadium next year.
That's what it was. It kind of threw me when I was doing the last podcast. I'm like, wait a minute, this is semi-home. And then after I said it, I was like, oh yeah, they've been playing here all year.
It's still, I mean, they don't get a crowd. I mean, you have to give San Diego State probably 1.5 points of home field advantage.
Yeah, I would say a little bit here for sure. And so this is one of those other conferences that does it at home here. 5.5 point spread though. What I have to say about this game, Brad, is that you're looking at offense versus defense here, but San Diego State's got a very good lockdown defense. And so Utah State's been finesse, and they've shocked some teams this year. They've shocked me a little bit. I can't believe that they're the team representing here. It's like, how the heck did that happen? They even lost to Boise State and a couple other teams, and really a really big head scratcher for me here. But San Diego State's defense is the best position group on the field
Oh
for
yeah.
sure, hands down. And if I look at what they did against other passing teams like Nevada, like Boise State, they handled them very simple. I have to think that San Diego State's going to handle this one. They should be able to run all over this team as well, Brad.
Yeah, I agree. So Utah State to me is kind of when they're a good passing attack, but they're kind of a poor man's version of a Fresno State or even a Nevada. So I think San Diego State's used to facing an offense like this. They really impressed me last week. I mean, I thought Boise State was the sharp side last week, and when it was 16-3 Boise State, I'm like, oh, Boise State. This is what I thought. Boise State coming on strong at the end of the season. They're the best team in the Mountain West. And lo and behold, San Diego State shut them down, scored 24 consecutive points to close that game out. I love their punter. I think San Diego State's punter is one of the best players in college football. Historically great. They'll play defense. They'll make Utah State drive length the field on them consistently. I don't think that's possible for Utah State. So I did bet San Diego State 4. Thought the line should be 6. Now at 5.5, 6. It's probably just a pass for me at the current number.
Yep. All right. Sounds good. And 5.5, 6. That's where I'm seeing it in a lot of books right now. So
shop as always. Shop lay 5.5, 6. Nah, not interested.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I think that they're going to win by more. I didn't bet it yet. My power rating on this. Let me just double check that. It's got to be. It's 5.5. So there you go. My power rating's right on the number, but do I want to go with the matchup handicap? That's what's been really the thing that you have to do sometimes, go for the matchup handicap, just because the market's going to follow a lot of great power ratings. If yours is great and it's emulating some of the best stuff out there, maybe it's maybe that's you're not going to find an edge in a lot of places. So I'm going to look at that rushing game and them stopping the pass. Let's move on to the next game here. We got Louisiana versus App State. And we know Billy Napier left, but he's not leaving this bowl game or this championship game because he is coaching this game, Brad. And I looked at this thing. This is the most equal matchup, I think, out of all of the bowl games. I mean, one team is ranked 16th in EPA margin. The other is ranked 19th in EPA margin. Looking them together, App State 36th in offensive success rate. You have Louisiana 28th in success rate, yet App State has number 12 in defensive success rate, and Louisiana ranked 26 in decent defense success rate. So basically, App State's got the little bit of the edge on defense, and Louisiana's got the little edge on offense. Obviously, these teams played each other earlier this year. Louisiana won that game, but since Louisiana won this game, wasn't App State a covering machine, just like those other teams you've been saying? Yeah. Well, let's get into this, man. I got to tell you, I put money on Louisiana because I got a +3 and I got a home dog. And so I don't know if you agree, but let's see what your thoughts are.
I laid 2 with App State. Would I lay 3? No, I think 3 is the right number. I think my power rankings have a 2.9. And let me just say this. If your power rankings off several points this time of the year, especially with these conference championship games. Now, bowl games, it might be off just because guys are out, this and that. You check for motivational disparities. But if they're really off this time of year, your power rating's off. The market isn't off. I'm just telling you. That's just my personal belief if you're way off on a team at this point. But here's what I think. Keep in mind, statistically speaking, they're relatively similar, like you mentioned. But App State played the tougher schedule. The Sun Belt divisionally very disparate, where App State's division with Coastal Carolina, Georgia State's a really good team, much superior than the division that Louisiana plays in with UL Monroe, Arkansas State, Texas State, bunch of dog crap teams, in my opinion. So keep that in mind when the teams are statistically almost even, especially during bowl season. There'll be disparities in strength of schedule. So that's why it leaned me more towards the App State side. They're just in better form. Who knows? Louisiana are they going to win one for the Gipper last game as a head coach, or are they kind of checked out because he's leaving for Florida? I think that's a 50-50 proposition.
Well, that's why I feel safe at the +3.
I think you're okay +3. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I think that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I will say App State does have the better yards per play margin, 1.42, 2.85. But you're right. Their schedule does rank higher. Sagarin's got them 101 and Louisiana 115. So you're all right about that. And I do agree. Coastal Carolina is a much better team. Georgia State. I feel like Louisiana got bored a little bit throughout the season too. And in that game against Monroe last week, I almost kind of feel like they're just getting ready for this week. Personally, maybe this was another
There you go.
one of those weird situations. But okay, this is the only one that we somewhat disagree on. Obviously, it's not in the same number. You wouldn't take the 3, I wouldn't take the 2 type thing. It seems like
Yep.
so that makes total
Numbers
sense.
matters, folks.
Numbers matter, especially in these games. Let's move on to the next game. We have Houston versus Cincinnati. 10.5 is the spread. Total is 53. Man, there is not a lot of pressure on Houston. They're already been written off this game, and all the pressure in the world, Brad, is on the Cincinnati Bearcats. And they're probably wondering if their coach is going to leave too. So, or maybe it's like wondering where he's going to go, not if he's going to leave. I don't know, but that is massive. You have these big schools, Oklahoma and Notre Dame, with open coaches, and here we are with Luke Fickell. And I don't know, man. My number is 11, just based on straight power ratings. But like I said earlier, Clayton Tune has been fantastic. Houston has been just a disruptor of teams. Whenever they were overlooked earlier in the season, they really came through and put a pounding on some teams. I am concerned for Cincinnati, is all I have to say.
So you're going to get disagreement from me. I get the whole Cincinnati with pressure, I thought it affected them when they were laying bigger numbers against less than competition, especially there in late October, early November, where they didn't cover 4 straight games. I hear you in that regard. I'm worried about Fickell leaving, but it's more of a play against Houston for me, and here's why. I know they won't ripped off 11 straight wins. I'll argue who did they beat? They didn't beat a single team in my top 50 of my power rating. And the best team they played lost to Texas Tech. That was the opener. SMU, I guess, is in that mix, but they weren't the same team down the stretch of the season that they were at the start. So strength of schedule disparity, in my opinion, just for the fact that Cincinnati, I saw them in a big-time game. They went at Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame's only home loss in 4 years. So to me, that's as good of a win as any team has in the country this year. And here's a sneaky one that I don't think is properly priced in the market. So for 2 years now, I don't think Houston's played in front of a hostile environment. No fans last year due to COVID. I guess it was a neutral setting at Texas Tech this year in the opener. But, look at the rest of their schedule. When have they played in front of a sold-out, packed crowd that's going to be rooting against them? A lot of these players haven't done it in a couple of years. So I look for the Cincinnati crowd to have an impact. I laid 10. I'd still lean 10.5 on Cincy.
All right. Well, the reason I didn't bet Houston and I just talked big about them is pretty much because, Cincinnati has a massive yards per play advantage here. Yep. Obviously, going through a harder schedule than Houston. Houston has had a cake schedule this year. What does it rank? It's 110th on
That's
Saturday.
Terrible for the American.
That's bad. I don't even think they played a tough non-conference game.
Texas Tech would be their toughest non-conference game.
Right, and didn't they lose that one? Yeah, they lost to Texas Tech, I believe,
by 17.
Yeah, and so that, and the fact that Houston is 2.52 net yards per play, and they're not even a bad yards per play. They're 1.42, but Cincinnati is a power team, and I can see that last touchdown when they're up by 10 points. They just decide to score it anyway, whatever it is, going over this. My power rating's right at the number, Brad, but okay. I try to make an argument. I was trying to lead you into saying I'm going to go back Houston, but I can't beat old Brad Powers over here, it looks like. So we'll have to move on.
Hey, I lose too. Even in my good weeks, I lose 45% of the time.
No, man, we all do. But, I'll tell you, this was more about I was trying to feed you into a little bit of hype, but that did not work. But maybe it'll work on this one. We have Georgia versus Alabama, and this is the top 2 teams in the nation, really. Ohio State, sure, but they got the 2 losses. You have to look at these 2 teams. The weird thing about this year, Brad, and we pound this to death other years, 2 of my top 4 teams are not going to be in the playoffs. That's just bottom line, and Ohio State's not going to be in the playoffs, and Alabama probably won't be in the playoffs unless Alabama beats Georgia. So that very possible that happens. My number is a perfect 7.5, and maybe mine's bigger than the market. So maybe my power ratings are a little bit wrong, but I just seen Alabama when they face compromising situations against teams that you thought were good. Texas A&M, Florida. What was that against Florida? What did we find out about Florida this year, man? Then Auburn last week. Now, what I will say is I saw Bryce Young when they had the camera on him, and he said, "I got this," and he was down 7 points or whatever.
Yep.
I saw his
You're
mouth.
about 10.
Yeah. It might have been the drive after the field goal, but it was.
Okay.
I saw him say, "I got this" with my mouth, and I was like, "Holy shit! I'm freaking more nervous than this guy over here." So that just showed me the leadership that Bryce Young has. And so that makes me like, holy cow, this kid is more confident than his fans. And maybe it's like that when you play sports. You're just like, hey, I'm just going to go out here and do what I can. But I'll tell you this, that makes me think that with Nick Saban there, the best coach in college football, he's always owned Kirby Smart. Even though my power ratings are 7.5, I'm not taking it. But what I did do is earlier in the season, Chris Felica actually told me to do this. I took Alabama's no to make the playoffs. I got plus 140, and then I'm betting Alabama on the money line to win this game at plus what 200 or something right now it is. So I think no matter what happens, is the only way Alabama doesn't make it is obvious, or does make it with 2 losses, is you'd have to have complete catastrophe. You'd have to have Cincinnati potentially losing, Oklahoma State losing, or one of the 3, Michigan, right? And because you got Notre Dame there, so it's like now if something crazy did happen, this game is it's pretty late. So or sorry, the was it Michigan, Ohio? I could put money line on Ohio, and I'll probably get plus 350 or something like that, plus 400 maybe if I shop against Michigan. I can't do the math right now, but and then I would have to bail out of this bet. But I think I'm going to make it. But at the same time, this game is going to be probably the best game to watch. Brad, what do you think?
Well, I think it's probably the best game to watch, even counting the NFL this weekend. I mean, that's just not talking as a college guy. I mean, it's probably everything you hope for. I mean, not just because it's 1-2 or 1-3, whatever the rankings come out tonight, but the thing that I bet Georgia. So that your green screen, your backdrop there is Circa. So they did a wonderful job a couple weeks ago. They released the spread on this game. And I like taking advantage because it's me versus the bookmaker, because no one else was betting at the time. And they released Georgia -3, and you could guess what I took at that point. So I am very comfortable with that bet. But with that being said, my number right now is 6.3. I'm waiting to see if we can get some 7s. I saw a 7 pop today at South Point. I didn't get that. It got immediately bet down. And I'm waiting to see some more 7s pop. And I think they will from time to time. But I'm going to bet Alabama +7 because I got the better quarterback and a better head coach and a team that never gets points getting a touchdown. So I'll talk myself into the Alabama side. But obviously, I am really concerned at the line of scrimmage because I've seen Alabama get beat up at the line of scrimmage by several teams this year, and none of those teams are Georgia or even close to Georgia at the line of scrimmage. So there is a major concern at that point. But I'll be on a lay 3, take 7. I expect in this game.
Well, I mean, you're going to have a lot of nerves with Georgia too, and obviously officiations make a difference. It's +7. I tell my listeners that's a no-brainer hedge between +3 and if you get -3 and you take 7, you have to do it for half at least. I say,
Yeah.
if your number's 8, shit, maybe you still do it for half. But your number 6.3, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a hedge. Make yourself feel comfortable. Grab a bowl of popcorn, watch this game. But man, I cannot wait for this thing. And Bama's playing.
I can't either.
Bama's playing to be in the national championship playoffs. I can't. It's going to be fantastic. Let's move on to Wake Forest Pitt. We only have a few minutes left here. The only thing I have to say about this, obviously, Wake Forest, they have that awful defense, and it has stepped it up the last few games. I was shocked the way they handled the NC State and Boston College, and they didn't really exactly handle NC State, but they slowed them down enough. They had to come to Jesus after they lost to North Carolina. I heard all about it. They got the locker room. They did a kumbaya, got together, blah, blah, blah. And they said, hey, we are not this bad. somehow they fixed it somewhat. And I was shocked how they handled Boston College last week. I really was. But what I will say is just, straight by the numbers here, Wake Forest, I have the more inferior team. I have Pittsburgh a couple points better. Pittsburgh's got a sack rate of 6th in the nation. And if there's any way to mess up a passing team, it's sacking the quarterback. And I love Clausen and all, but this could be just a smelly spot for Wake Forest. But what I will say is Pittsburgh has had the choke gene in them a couple times this year.
Oh yeah.
That North Carolina game, I was fortunate to cover in overtime. They were winning that game. North Carolina couldn't get out of their own way, and then they tie it up, and then overtime. Thank God I get the 3.5 or whatever I bet. I can't remember the number, but Jesus,
that was probably laid 6.5, and they won by 7 in overtime.
I don't think
wasn't that the case.
I probably laid a 5.5 or 6.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that sounds more familiar. I have to check back, but I remember. I'm starting to promise myself I remember these, Brad, because of all the times that the shit happens on the other side of it. But I do remember that one. But I will say that straight numbers wise, I have 2.5, Pitt minus 2.5. I haven't bet it. Any thoughts?
Pitt's my favorite bet of the week. I laid 2.5. I bet it several times in different books. I mean, it's not like a huge numbers play for me. I have it at 4.3. I just think, Wake Forest has a big time deficiency. It's the defense side of the ball. Pitt doesn't. I mean, they're solid on both sides. And my only concern is Pat Narduzzi. I think it can get out coached by Dave Clawson. That's my only concern. And if both teams play their A game, Pitt's, again, my favorite bet of the week. The question is, Pitt's kind of a high variance team. We've seen them lose to Miami. We've seen them lose to Western Michigan. But I think they're locked in here. And they get pressure on Sam Hartman. Kenny Pickett's just as good, if not better, than Sam Hartman as far as the quarterback matchup. So I like Pitt here. I mean, statistically speaking, Pitt's like a top 10 caliber team. If you look at their yards per play and some of their other metrics. And another pivot that I liked, my power rankings were very anti-Pitt last week. And now all of a sudden they were pro Pitt. I kind of like that.
Look at that, man. So it flipped on you. 1.27 net yards per play to Wake Forest at 0.28. I remember that Wake Forest Army game. Holy cow, was that a shootout in a way? I mean, a running versus passing shootout, but that was a fun game to watch if you hate defense, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Pittsburgh on both sides of the ball, much better. Pitt's defensive success rate 105 for Wake Forest, ranked 105th, and 33rd for Pittsburgh. So big discrepancy there. And Pitt's offense is actually ranked a little bit better too. So
yeah, that's why I don't understand 3. I just don't. I think it should be at least 3.5.
Okay. No, that's a great point there. Yeah, sometimes when you want a team to win, you got to remember it might not be the right side. I've been kind of rooting for Wake all year, but Pitt might be the right side this game. But they are, like Brad said, a high variance team. Let's go on to the biggest game because I'm a Big Ten fan. Iowa at Michigan, and like you said, Michigan in a crazy spot. They're going to the playoffs, but it's after they beat their biggest rival. And I was saying in the last podcast, Brad, there's fans that would rather beat Ohio State than get to the playoffs. It really is. It's, I mean, that's how much of an impact this is. And so I guess if there is a letdown spot, it's Oklahoma State and it's Michigan in these two big games. But man, I'll tell you this, the fact that Iowa ranks 123rd in offensive EPA, they're worse than Wisconsin is. I mean, been on Wisconsin throughout the year. Obviously, I love them. They're my team. I'm not saying I've been betting on them. I've probably been fading them more. But I mean, I thought Wisconsin's offense was worse, but no, Iowa's offense has been worse. And they lucked into that win against Nebraska. That was more of a Nebraska choke job because that's just what they do. So here's the thing. Can Iowa somehow put it together and beat this big momentum team in Michigan? Is Harbaugh a good enough coach to calm his team down and say, look, man, you beat a big team, but you're not even close to where our goals are supposed to be? I don't even know how I coach this, Brad, personally. Not something I do, obviously, but man, my number is 9. So it's not 11. It's 9. I know some people.
Iowa.
I probably have to, and I haven't yet because I'm not sure if it's going to stay. I think I'm not sure if it's a bunch of Iowa money's going to come in. Maybe it will, What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think you'll see Iowa money. So I went against my power rating a little bit. I have Michigan 12, but I am very fearful of the letdown. Like I said earlier, it'd be on brand for Michigan to lose it. Forget the point spread; it'd be on brand for them to lose the game. Iowa's a team that can be high variance. Why? Turnovers. They can certainly create them on defense, and that'll be a concern for Michigan. I thought McNamara threw a very key pick, at least early on in that game against the Buckeyes, where they could have jumped on them 14-0, and he didn't. He threw that bad pick. Iowa can turn you over, but the problem is, by far the weakest unit on the field is Iowa's offense. You mentioned it, and their quarterbacks can turn it over, and I think that's the whole game. If you just give me one stat line, I just got to look at the Iowa quarterbacks. I want to see their interceptions. And if it's two, then Michigan's going to win the two or more. Michigan's going to easily win and cover this game. If it's less than that, then I think Iowa is certainly the play here. So I did bet Iowa plus 11. One wasn't my favorite play of the week. Kind of waited around. I didn't fire right away. Waited throughout the day. I just talked myself into it.
All right, you talked yourself into an Iowa play. Well, it's harder when you are so sure on a letdown to have that side hit and you not bet it rather than lose it itself.
Yeah.
When you did bet it, that happens to everyone, man. Brad, thank you so much for coming on. We are out of time. Where could our viewers and listeners find your great information and plays for the year?
Yeah, Brad Power Sports is my website, bradpowersports.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at BradPower7.
All right. Make sure you guys check out Brad. Huge thanks, Brad. Had a blast talking to you, man. Enjoy the games and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having me on.
Sorry, man. I accidentally fell off. But I ended it. So great job, dude. I had a